Coming up on this episode, looking at some guards that the Golden State Warriors could target in free agency this offseason, particularly Anfernee Simons and Collin Sexton, both of which were linked to the franchise on Monday. Welcome back to the Golden State with Mates podcast. Hope you're all having a good start to your week. Steve Kerr, after re-signing with the Warriors, has spoken about the need for the team to get younger and to get more availability on the roster next season. ESPN's Anthony Slater has also discussed Golden State's need for more mid-prime players. So what does that look like? Well, that to me is players between 26 and 30 years old. I think it was last episode I mentioned the numbers last season in regard to the Warrior roster, or this past season, and the Warrior roster that completely lacked players between the 25 and 30 age bracket, it must be said. And the age demographic of this roster has basically been young, rookie, second-year players, and also obviously veterans, very veteran, the oldest team in the league with the likes of Steph, Jimmy, Draymond, Al Horford, even acquiring a guy like Podziemski, who, okay, maybe not as old from an age standpoint, but from a body health standpoint, is certainly on the more advanced end when it comes to an NBA career, it must be said. So I've looked at what the Warriors could do this offseason because it looks to me, it's appearing more and more likely that we're not going to go out and get a star necessarily. The Giannis thing has faded away to essentially a shadow. There were 6 teams in Mark Stein's recent report on Giannis's future, either directly linked to Giannis or linked to Jaylen Brown if he was on the move in a Giannis trade to the Celtics. 6 teams in that report. Not one of them was the Warriors. So I think the Giannis thing, we can basically put that to one side, as disappointing as that was and as hard as Golden State chased Giannis before the mid-season deadline. And then Kawhi, you've got Law Murray of The Athletic coming out and saying the Clippers shouldn't be interested in Draymond or Jimmy or whatever players the Warriors have to give up in a Kawhi trade. It would most likely have to be Jimmy. Even with the picks coming in, the Clippers aren't going to want to necessarily go into full rebuild mode. They're going to want to try to remain as competitive as they can, even if they do trade Kawhi. And Law Murray looked at the offer from the Timberwolves as a more intriguing one for the Clippers compared to the Warriors, where you'd be getting Jimmy Butler, who's set to miss an early chunk of next season. So I don't think the Warriors are going to get a start by the sounds of it. The way this is going now, maybe it's all a media mirage. Maybe the Warriors are trying to move in silence and they've got something brewing behind the scenes. I just don't think it's going to happen at this point. So it's more like, okay, what can the Warriors do with the non-taxpayer mid-level exception, which they can get access to depending on what happens with Draymond and Kristaps Porzingis, obviously, in free agency if Draymond opts out of that player option. So I've started to look at some guys, and I want to do this in positional order. I'll do a few different episodes. I'm going to go guards, forwards, centers kind of thing to look at in free agency because the Warriors will have the flexibility to get someone maybe, again, up to the non-taxpayer mid-level exception around that $15, $16 million mark, which can get you a good player. Maybe the Warriors try and divvy that up and try and get multiple players. If I look back at the Lakers last season, they got Ayton and Marcus Smart, or Ayton and someone else, I think, with a combination of the non-taxpayer mid-level exception or something like that. So you could divvy it up and give it to a few players. D'Anthony Melton still sits there. I'm going to talk about him a little bit later in regard to this whole guard setup. But the reason I really want to start off with the guards is because we had a report from Brett Siegel of Clutch Points on Monday discussing the interest that the Warriors might have in Anfernee Simons and Collin Sexton as free agents this offseason. And my first reaction to that is pretty underwhelming. When we've been talking about Giannis and Kawhi and LeBron and all these other stars potentially coming to the Warriors, when you have to change your perspective and thinking to Anfernee Simons and Collin Sexton, that's a pretty hard thing to wrap your head around, it must be said. However, again, as I just said, it doesn't look like they're necessarily going to be acquiring a star. So this is the kind of caliber of player we probably have to set our focus to, and the Warriors are likely to set their focus to. So as much as it's underwhelming, I understand it. I absolutely understand it. Are they world beaters that are going to, catapult the Warriors from the 10th seed in the Western Conference up to being a top 6 seed? No, not necessarily. But could they be helpful players? Yes. And more importantly, could they be really helpful while Jimmy's out? Yeah, absolutely. I look at a guy like Anfernee Simons, and he's got his limitations. He's got his deficiencies. The entire archetype of a score-first small guard who doesn't really defend, who can be inefficient, like, that's the value of that player has gone completely out the window. To the point where a guy like Jordan Poole went from being such an important part of Golden State's championship team 4 years ago to getting a 4-year, $128 million contract, and now he cannot get minutes for the New Orleans Pelicans, for goodness sake. So that the value of that kind of player has gone down the drain a lot. However, I still think they can serve a purpose in the right situation, in the right role, and more importantly, on the right contract. Like, I think Jordan Poole can still serve a role in the NBA going forward after his final year on this 4-year, $128 million contract, but just not at $30+ million a year. And the same can be said for Anfernee Simons. He's coming off a 4-year, $100 million extension that he originally signed with the Trailblazers, then got traded to the Celtics, now finished the season with the Chicago Bulls. Now, Anfernee Simons isn't going to get $25 million again, but if he could be acquired and signed on the non-taxpayer mid-level exception on a 3-year, $45 million deal or 4 years, $60-something million deal, then that looks okay, and he can serve a purpose on that number and be quite valuable to you. Again, especially to a team like the Warriors, who ranked 20th in three-point percentage last season and 19th in offensive rating, and will enter next season without Jimmy Butler and Moses Moody, their second best offensive player and one of their stars, and they're probably their second best behind Steph three-point shooter. So a guy like Anfernee Simons suddenly holds some value to the Warriors. Now, when I look at him, when I look at a guy like Collin Sexton, do they immediately jump off the page to me as Warrior-type players, as Steve Kerr-type players? Absolutely not. Because Steve Kerr generally likes guys who can play defense, right? He's always going to kind of lean into that more so than offense at times, particularly when he's got Steph there, who he probably thinks, okay, it's Steph Curry. With him on the floor, we can have an average offense just with him, right? And then I'm going to lean in defensively. It's why a guy like Kevon Looney played a lot and was valuable to the Warriors for a number of years, right? So a guy like Anfernee Simons, Collin Sexton tries a bit more on defense. I'll give him that. But these are undersized guards who are going to struggle on that end of the floor. You wonder, like, what usage are the Warriors going to get out of these guys? But I found it really interesting. Monty Poole reported just before Steve Kerr resigned that in the negotiations, the front office, I'm assuming Joe Lacob and Mike Dunleavy Jr., had asked Steve, or one of the requests of Steve, were to be more open when it comes to particular players and just like coaching schemes and stuff like that. And one of these things is like, sometimes you just need a guy who can dribble the ball and put the ball in the basket. That's because guess what? That's basketball, right? You got to dribble the ball around. You got to put the ball in the bucket. Okay. Very simple sometimes. And I think the Warriors have completely lacked that kind of player. And instead, and I understand it, Mike Dunleavy Jr. said, these are our two stars, Steph Curry, Jimmy Butler. We are going to surround those guys with role players. Guys that can hit shots off the catch, like really prioritize stretch bigs, for example. Guys like that can defend, led by Draymond, obviously. They have tried to prioritize role players around Steph and Jimmy. The problem is when Steph and Jimmy get injured, which, again, Steph's 38 years old, bound to happen. Jimmy, okay, obviously unlucky with the ACL, but the dude's still 36 years old. He was probably going to face some injury concerns anyway. When those two guys went down, what did the Warriors have? The Warriors had a very, very underwhelming offense that was pretty tough to watch at times late in the season. Because guys like Brandin, Podziemski, Anfernee, Melton, they're not built. They're not pure bucket getters. They're not built to go out and get you 25 a game to try and keep you in certain matchups. They're not built for that. They're built to play alongside Steph Curry and Jimmy Butler. And they're valuable in those roles. But when they're asked, we saw Anfernee Melton. Okay, when he was asked, okay, here's some higher usage in the offense. Now we don't have Steph and Jimmy. What did he do? He sucked. Blatantly sucked. It must be said. And so that's nothing against Anfernee Melton. That's just the type of player he is. And at some point, the Warriors are going to have to say, Steph Curry's 38 years old. He needs some help. Jimmy Butler's going to start next season on the sidelines. We need just some offensive juice here. And that's what a guy like Anfernee Simons could provide. Do I love the fit next to Steph Curry? Not really. Again, defensive limitations. Do I think he's going to be part of closing lineups every night? Not necessarily. But you know what? When Steph's off the floor, the Warriors are probably going to have a far greater chance of remaining competitive because guess what? Anfernee Simons can go out and get you 25 or 30 in a way that no one on the roster at the end of this season could on a anywhere near consistent basis. Anfernee Simons has averaged 20-plus points per game. So is Collin Sexton, mind you, averaged 20-plus points per game in multiple seasons. And Anfernee Simons has done it fairly recently with the Trailblazers, right? High volume three-point shooter, pretty decent three-point shooter, obviously. I think shot even in the Celtics this season, 6-man role, 14, 15 points off the bench, 39.5% from three-point range. Look at what the Warriors' numbers were from an individual standpoint this season. Okay? Since Jordan Poole was traded in 2023, Golden State have had 2 blokes average 20 points a game in a season. Steph's done it all 3 seasons, and Jimmy's done it once. Okay? The Warriors were proven correct for trading Jordan Poole when they did. Now, the returning package, not great necessarily, whatever. It was a salary dump in the end, and it's proven the right decision given what has happened to Jordan Poole over the next 3 years. However, that doesn't mean they don't miss that kind of player. And so to me, Anfernee Simons, a guy like that, is just another version, maybe better than Jordan Poole, just another version of Jordan Poole. And we saw what Poole did for this team in 2022, and even to an extent, even though he got traded after the 2022-23 season, he still averaged 20 points a game in that season. The Warriors don't have that type of player on the roster, that 6-man who can come off the bench and just be a bucket getter for you. Okay, Brandin Podziemski averaged 13.5 points a game this season. Anthony Melton averaged 12, 13 points a game. That's what these dudes are right now. 12, 13 point per game scorers who aren't necessarily going to go out and get you 30. Anfernee Simons can do that. So that's to me why the Warriors could be targeting a guy like that. Because they just look at it and say, if it's not going to be a star, if we're not going to give up our assets for a star, we just need some offensive life here to help our offensive rating, which again ranked 19th, and 3-point percentage, which ranked 20th. Anfernee Simons fills those 2 needs, even though we appreciate and understand there's probably going to be times where he puts up shots and Steve Kerr's like, man, this shot selection is awful. Or he doesn't try on defense and Steve Kerr's getting frustrated for that. Like, there's going to be downside to a guy like Anfernee Simons. No doubt. But for a team that just desperately needs offense, particularly before Jimmy comes back, like, that dude could be a lifesaver to some degree. Collin Sexton, I don't think I think I'd prefer Simons because he's just got a little bit more offensive juice. Sexton's more like a downhill attacker and not as good a 3-point shooter, obviously, as Simons. Tries a little bit more on defense, bit nuggety. Simons has got a bit more length, though. So I think I'd prefer Simons. I'm assuming Sexton would probably become a little bit cheaper. Like, maybe you could get Sexton and someone else. And again, as I spoke about before, divvying up the non-taxpayer middle-level exception and maybe giving Sexton like $10 to $12 million a year and then having $5-6 million left over to spend on another player, something like that. Oh, but Simons, I think, is still good enough where he's probably going to demand or require like the full, or if not all, the non-taxpayer middle-level exception, a large chunk of it, at least. So I see the value in Anfernee Simons. Okay. Now, let's go down the list here, because the other thing with this is these guys are, I think, Simons is 26, Sexton's 27. So these guys are mid-prime players. So again, that makes sense. The Warriors want offense. They also want guys high availability. Both players have had some injury concerns over recent seasons, but they're coming in to what should be the middle of their prime. Okay. So again, that's another reason why the Warriors would be targeting these kind of guys. So I went down the list and looked at the free agents this offseason that are basically going to be sitting between 25 and 30 years old. The most realistic ones to me that would at least be of a beneficial piece for the Warriors: Simons, Sexton, Kobe White fits in the same mold to me as Simons, just a very similar type of player. Not going to give you much defensively, but can just be a pure bucket getter offensively. Could be a 6-man for you. Did that a little bit to a good extent with Charlotte to end the season. I'm assuming the Hornets are probably going to try and re-sign him. He was a guy that I've spoken about previously, dating back to last offseason when we were talking about like Kuminga signing trades. And it was like Chicago had some interest in Kuminga. Could we get Kobe White out of it? I think if the Bulls had their time again, they probably would have done that rather than just trade Kobe White for some second-round picks at the mid-season deadline. Could Kobe White be had for like the non-taxpayer mid-level exception? Feel like he's going to want a little bit more than that, maybe somewhere closer to $20 million. It wouldn't astound me if he's under that and he's within technically the Warriors' price range if they do open up the full non-taxpayer MLE. So that's another guy just to monitor because we have spoken about him in the past. Quentin Grimes is another at Philadelphia. More of a catch and shoot guy, but obviously has had moments in his career where he has flashed some stuff off the dribble. Another guy who probably could be had within that non-taxpayer MLE range. They're guys to me, those four guys who, again, not world beaters. They're not overwhelming you with excitement going into next season necessarily, but guys, particularly while Jimmy's out, who could come in and play a role with the Warriors and be really important on certain nights. They're not going to be ultra consistent. They're going to have nights where they probably shoot you out of games with that lack of efficiency. But you know what? They're also capable of going for, Anfernee Simons could have a 40-point game, randomly win you a game. And it's like, you're looking at other guys on the Warrior roster, like who's going for 40 on this roster? Like no one's capable of doing that. Anfernee Simons is. Okay, Kobe White, a guy like that is. So these guys, you can see why they're not necessarily Warrior-style players, but I feel like we have to adjust our thinking now to almost a new style of Warriors where it's like, no Jimmy, Steph's 38, he just needs some help. We just need dudes who can put the ball in the bucket and dribble and create an advantage offensively. Get by a guy on the perimeter. Any chance of that, please, because let's be honest, the final months of this past season, we didn't see much of that. It was very much I don't think the Warrior offense changed a whole lot, right? It was simply like a lot of the same split cut actions and stuff like that and just trying to find, and I think Steve Kerr, credit to him, I think he does a pretty good job of giving a pretty average team the plays in which they can actually generate pretty open looks, right? I think the Warriors got a lot of like reasonable 3-point shooting opportunities this past season. It was just generally sometimes not the right guys taking those shots partly because the defense would allow it, right? And then some dudes just like D'Anthony Melton shot less than 30% from three. I don't think he's a sub 30% 3-point shooter. I've seen in previous years, he can be above average 3-point shooter. So he just had a poor shooting year. So they're probably the most realistic who could also make an impact, right? Simon, Sexton, Kobe White, and Quentin Grimes. I've got a group here of, again, guys between 26 and 30 years old who are unlikely, I would say, but could still make an impact. The top of these is Ayo Dosunmu. The Timberwolves would be just having an absolute nightmare if they let him walk in for agency. Again, he's going to want more than non-taxpayer MLE. It's probably going to be more like $20 million based on what he did during the playoffs and his overall impact for the Timberwolves. So he'd be fantastic with the Warriors. Don't get me wrong. I just don't think he's going to be within their price range. Luke Kennard, I think the Lakers are going to try and keep him after what he did during the playoffs and his value to them, obviously high-level 3-point shooter. Bruce Brown is coming off a minimum contract. I don't know, unless the Warriors are willing to give him a huge payday, which I don't think they are. Like, I just don't see why he would come to Golden State. He's like a GP2 type player where he's more defensive-minded, offensively knows where to be, can move the ball in the right spots, blah, blah, blah. But, like, not one of these bucket getters that we've been talking about that the Warriors need. So, given he doesn't really feel a need, the Warriors aren't going to pay him the kind of money that's going to convince him to come to the Bay Area. So, that's just not going to happen, I wouldn't have thought. And then Lou Dort, who has a team option that many expect the Thunder will turn down to create a little bit more room, obviously, because they've got Jalen Williams and Chet Holmgren in their extensions, $239.3 million extensions kicking in next season. So Lou Dort could become a free agent. I just don't really want Lou Dort on the Warriors. I'm just I understand you can do a job for you defensively. The 3-point shooting just isn't great to me. Like, he's a pretty pretty average to negative offensive player. Again, that's not what the Warriors need necessarily. And I know we're discussing some of these guards and it's like, well, how do they fit with Steph? How do they, and a lot of it is, well, they fit poorly because there's going to be huge defensive concerns. But really, like, I'd rather this team come out next season and try and be an above average offense and provide us a little bit of entertainment on that end and try and be, I don't know, if Steph's healthy, a top 10 offense or something like that. And particularly when Jimmy comes back, be a top 10 offense, even if it means you take a step back defensively. To me, like, so be it. During a long regular season, a lot of these games are just about who can outscore the other team, who can put the ball in the bucket more, right? Defense matters more in the playoffs. Completely understand and appreciate that. But during a long regular season, sometimes you just need guys who can go get a bucket. And then a couple of other guys here to finish off. You got to aim higher than this. Kevin Huerter and Josh Okogie, just wing-type players. Kevin Huerter's an offensive-minded three-point shooter, obviously. Josh Okogie, more of a defensive-minded player. But again, like, you got to aim higher if you're the Warriors. Like, those dudes, just, I'd rather, like, keep Seth Curry on the roster. I think Seth Curry will be gone, but I'd probably prefer to keep him. I'd prefer to keep GP too. Like, those guys are just going to probably take minutes from a guy like Will Richards. So these are the guys I've mentioned, 10 guys there basically between 26 and 30 that will be free agents this offseason. The big question mark I want to leave you guys with is, do you want to target one of these guys, or would you just prefer to pay D'Anthony Melton? Because that's the thing. You're not going to get, like, Anfernee Simons and Collin Sexton. You're not going to have the money to get one of those guys and also re-sign D'Anthony Melton. So from a Warrior perspective, you're essentially making a choice. You're asking yourself, do we want Anfernee Simons or do we want D'Anthony Melton? That's basically what it comes down to. Okay? And what would you prefer? Because to me, I think there might be more value in I think D'Anthony Melton might be a more impactful player to winning in most scenarios than Anfernee Simons. I'm not as low on D'Anthony Melton as some people are, right? I think he's just the role he was in towards the final months of the season after Steph and Jimmy went down just wasn't appropriate for him whatsoever. Okay, so I'm not as low on him as some are after what we saw in the final few months. So in a perfect scenario where Steph and Jimmy are healthy and maybe Porzingis comes back as a third option, in the right scenario, I think D'Anthony Melton would probably be better than Anfernee Simons. I think in a playoff scenario, I think D'Anthony Melton might be more trustworthy and you might have more impact and value from him than Anfernee Simons. So there is an argument to be made that, hey, like, you might as well just re-sign Melton rather than chase one of these guys. The problem is, and it's a big problem, and why the Warriors might be looking to say, see you, D'Anthony, out the door you go, in comes Anfernee Simons or Collin Sexton or whatever else, is, again, the primary factor of they just need some offensive juice. And Anfernee Simons is capable of going to give you 30, 35 in a way that D'Anthony Melton simply isn't. They're very different type of players. And if everything went fantastic for the Warriors and Jimmy wasn't injured and Steph was still fully healthy and a few years younger, then D'Anthony Melton's a better fit, no doubt. But that's not the reality. Jimmy's starting next season on the sideline. Steph's going to be 39 by the time the playoffs roll around next year. You need some other offensive option, some other shot maker and shot creator, and Anfernee Simons does that at a far higher level than D'Anthony Melton or Brandin Podziemski for that matter. So to me, that's why the Warriors would be looking at a guy like this and saying, D'Anthony, look, we'd love to keep you. If you want to pick up your $3.5 million player option, we'll certainly have you back. But I don't think D'Anthony Melton's going to do that. He's going to opt out. He's going to try and make some money. I don't begrudge him for that whatsoever. And I think the Warriors might be better served getting a guy like Anfernee Simons or Collin Sexton. Then you've obviously got the injury and the availability aspect of this. Now, yes, Sexton and Simons might have faced some injury issues in the past, but their health history certainly isn't as long as D'Anthony Melton's, who's only just come off a minutes restriction from that torn ACL he returned from in the start of December or whatever. So moving forward, who are you going to trust more in terms of their body? It's certainly going to be Simons or Sexton over a guy like D'Anthony Melton. So between the need for the Warriors in terms of an offensive spark and the availability, I mean, that's the reason They're the two reasons right there why you would target Anfernee Simons and be willing to let Anthony Melton walk. But let me know what you guys think of any of these guys that I've mentioned here in this episode, any of the 10 guards, again, between that 26 and 30 range. It's going to be fascinating to see what happens because the Warriors could just draft a guy at 11 in the backcourt and be like, okay, that's us set. We're going to keep Pods. Maybe we still let Melton walk, but between Pods, Steph, and this rookie, that we're going to be covered, essentially. Maybe we bring back a guy like GP2 or something like that. We have LJ Cryer on a 2-way contract. We're just set there in terms of kind of our backcourt. Maybe we add a couple of wings or whatever else. I don't know. But I just struggle to see a world in which the Warriors get Anfernee Simons and keep Anthony Melton. That's just not going to happen. I think that's impossible to see. And the other thing is, if I'm Brandin Podziemski, I'm extension eligible this offseason. I'm looking at what the team does starting at the draft and then in free agency, because if they get a front court player, a forward big man type, whatever it may be at the draft, which I think is more likely, then that could signal that they're chasing a guy like Anfernee Simons or Collin Sexton in free agency. And if that's the case, and you're giving Simons a 4-year, $60 million contract or something like that, if that's the case, then suddenly what does that do to Brandin Podziemski's chances of getting a big extension ahead of his 4th year? I think that impacts it significantly because all of a sudden, Steph's eligible for a 2-year, $140 million extension. If he gets that or somewhere near that, and you've got Anfernee Simons making $15, $16 million a year, are you also going to want to give Brandin Podziemski $20 million a year? Then you're suddenly paying over $100 million to a trio of Steph Curry, Brandin Podziemski, and Anfernee Simons. I mean, that's a solid backcourt trio, right? It's not great. It's not one of the best backcourt combinations in the league, and you're paying over $100 million to it. That ain't going to happen. The Warriors that'd be malpractice if they were paying over $100 million from 2027, 28 for the next couple of years beyond that on a combination of Steph, Pods, and Simons. Like, they're just not going to do that. They've done it once before when they had Steph, Clay, and CP3, and it was clearly a mistake because they finished 10th in the Western Conference. They got eliminated in the first playing game by the Kings. Clearly a mistake. And at least in that scenario, you're talking about 3 future Hall of Famers in Steph, Clay, and CP3. At least you can fall back on that. This is Steph at 39. That's what he would be at the time the extension kicks in. And then you've got Pods and Simons, neither of which are going to develop into all-stars, we don't think, at this point. So anyway, let me know what you guys think in regard to the impact on Pods, the impact on Anthony Melton, any of the guys I've mentioned in this episode, but particularly Anfernee Simons and Collin Sexton after they were linked to Golden State as potential free agency targets on Monday. I'll finish up there. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel already, that would be greatly appreciated. Follow me at POC252. That's POK252 on X/Twitter. And I'm off to watch Game 5 of the Western Conference Finals between the Thunder and Spurs.